For 15 years, I secretly paid the mortgage on my son Cameron's dream home, watching him build a life with his wife Natasha while I lived quietly in the guest room. But the night Natasha screamed, "Stop breathing so loud. You're annoying everyone," at their dinner party, something inside me snapped. What she didn't know was that without my monthly $4,200 payments, their perfect suburban life would crumble in 90 days, and I was about to pull the plug on everything. My name is Vivian Ashford. And at 70 years old, I thought I'd finally found peace living with my son Cameron and his wife Natasha in their beautiful colonial house in Riverside Gardens, just outside Hartford, Connecticut. But let me tell you the whole story, because the truth about how I ended up there and what I've been hiding is far more complicated than anyone realizes. It all started 15 years ago, back in 2009. When Cameron was 32 and desperately in love with an ambitious young marketing executive named Natasha Pierce. They'd been dating for 2 years, and Cameron was ready to propose. But he came to me one rainy April evening with tears streaming down his face and desperation in his voice. "Mom," he said, sitting at my kitchen table in my modest 2-bedroom apartment in West Hartford, "I found the perfect house. It's everything Natasha has ever dreamed of, a 1920s colonial on Elm Street in Riverside Gardens. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, original hardwood floors, 2 acres with mature oak trees, and it's in the best school district in the county." I could see the love and hope shining in his eyes as he pulled out the real estate listing on his phone. The house was stunning: white clapboard siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch, and a garden that looked like something from a magazine. The asking price was $485,000. "But here's the problem," Cameron continued, his voice breaking. "We need $97,000 for the down payment, and even with both our salaries combined, the monthly mortgage payment would be $4,200. We're short about $40,000 for the down payment. And honestly, the monthly payments would stretch us so thin that we'd have nothing left for repairs, emergencies, or starting a family. There's another couple making an offer this weekend. And if we can't match it, we'll lose the house forever." He buried his face in his hands. "I want to give Natasha everything she deserves, Mom. She grew up in Westport in a house twice that size. Her father's a successful attorney. Her mother runs her own interior design business. When they look at me, I know they see a middle management office worker who can barely afford to take their daughter out to dinner at a nice restaurant. If I can't even provide her with a decent home, how can I ask her to marry me?" My heart broke for him. Cameron had always been such a thoughtful, hard-working young man. After graduating from UConn with a business degree, he'd taken a job at an insurance company in Hartford, working his way up from claims adjuster to regional supervisor. He made a decent living, about $65,000 a year, but in 2009, that wasn't enough to afford a house in one of Connecticut's most desirable neighborhoods. What Cameron didn't know was that I was in a very different financial position than he realized. 3 months earlier, I had sold Ashford Catering and Events, the business my late husband Robert and I had built together over 30 years. We'd started with nothing but a borrowed van and a dream back in 1978, catering small office parties and wedding receptions out of our home kitchen. Robert handled the business side while I focused on the food and event planning. Slowly, word spread about our attention to detail, our innovative menus, and our ability to make any event feel special. By the 1990s, we were catering exclusive events for some of Connecticut's wealthiest families, gubernatorial fundraisers, country club galas, corporate retreats for Fortune 500 companies, and elaborate wedding receptions at venues like the Hartford Club and the Simsbury Inn. We'd built a sterling reputation and a client list that read like a who's who of Connecticut society. When Robert passed away from a heart attack in 2005, I thought about closing the business, but my grief transformed into determination. I threw myself into work, expanding our services to include full event planning and coordination. By 2008, Ashford Catering was one of the most sought-after event companies in central Connecticut, with annual revenues exceeding $1.2 million. When the recession hit in 2008, I made a difficult decision. Rather than struggle through the economic downturn, I sold the business to my longtime assistant manager, Patricia Chen, who had been with us for 12 years and understood every aspect of the operation. The sale price was $2.8 million. Patricia paid $800,000 upfront and agreed to monthly payments for the remainder over 5 years. Suddenly, at 67, I found myself wealthy but purposeless. I'd moved into a simple apartment, driving my same reliable Honda Civic, shopping at the same grocery stores, living modestly while trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. Cameron had no idea about the sale. I'd always been private about money, and after Robert's death, I'd become even more cautious about discussing finances. I'd seen too many families torn apart by inheritance disputes and money drama. But seeing my son's heartbreak that April evening, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my newfound wealth. "How much did you say you needed?" I asked quietly. $40,000 for the down payment, but Mom, I know you don't have that kind of money. I wasn't asking for a loan. I just needed to tell someone how frustrated I am. I stood up and walked to my bedroom, returning with my checkbook. Without saying a word, I wrote out a check for $50,000. Cameron's eyes widened in shock. "Mom, what are you doing? Where did you get? I can't accept this. It's not a gift," I said firmly, though we both knew it was. "Consider it an early inheritance. Your father and I always wanted to see you settled in a beautiful home with a family of your own." This is what he would have wanted. Cameron stared at the check, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "By being happy," I replied. "By building a beautiful life in that house." But here's what I didn't tell him. I had no intention of stopping at the down payment. The next day, I called the mortgage company and spoke to a supervisor. I explained that my son was purchasing a home, and I wanted to set up an arrangement where I would handle the mortgage payments directly while he believed he was paying them himself. The supervisor was initially confused, but when I explained that I wanted to gift him the house payments without him knowing, she helped me structure it perfectly. Cameron would make his monthly mortgage payments of $4,200 to a special account I controlled. Then, I would make the actual mortgage payments to the bank from my own funds, to Cameron. It would look like his payments were going directly to the mortgage company. In reality, his money was simply accumulating in an account that I monitored while I paid the real mortgage from my own assets. Why the elaborate setup? The supervisor asked. "Because I want my son to feel proud and independent," I explained. "I want him to believe he's providing for his family on his own. This way, he gets to keep his dignity while I ensure he never loses his home." The system worked flawlessly. For 15 years, Cameron faithfully made his monthly payment of $4,200, believing he was paying the mortgage on his home. Meanwhile, I quietly transferred $4,200 from my own account to the bank each month. His payments went into a special account that had accumulated over $750. By 2024, money I planned to eventually give to him and Natasha for their retirement or their daughters' college educations. Cameron and Natasha were married 6 months after they moved into the house, in a beautiful garden ceremony in their backyard. I helped pay for the wedding, too, though I told Cameron it was money I'd saved from my catering business years earlier. Natasha looked stunning in her designer gown, and Cameron had never looked happier. Over the years, I watched them build a beautiful life in that house. Natasha left her marketing job when their twin daughters, Lily and Rose, were born in 2012. Cameron was promoted twice and eventually became a regional director, earning enough to cover their daily expenses comfortably while I secretly continued covering the mortgage. The girls grew up thinking of the house as their permanent family home. They had their own bedrooms, decorated exactly as they wanted them. Rose's room was painted lavender with white furniture and shelves full of books. Lily's room was mint green with a desk for her art projects and a daybed for sleepovers with friends. They played in the 2-acre backyard, climbing the old oak trees, having tea parties on the back patio, and running through the sprinkler system I'd had installed. For their 5th birthday, I visited regularly, bringing gifts for the girls and helping with holiday preparations. Natasha was always polite but distant. I could sense she found me somewhat intrusive. But I attributed it to the normal mother-in-law and daughter-in-law adjustment period. I tried to respect their space and their independence, even as I longed to be closer to my only son and my precious granddaughters. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. I'd been having some health issues, nothing serious, but my blood pressure was elevated, and my doctor was concerned about me living alone at 67. I was also feeling increasingly lonely in my apartment. My neighbors were mostly young professionals who kept to themselves, and I found myself spending entire weekends without speaking to another human being. One Sunday in March 2021, I was visiting Cameron and his family for dinner. The girls, then 9 years old, were telling me about their school projects when Cameron looked at me thoughtfully. "Mom," he said, "you know, this house is really big. We have that whole guest suite on the first floor that we never use. It's got its own bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area. What if you moved in with us? The girls would love having Grandma around more, and honestly, Natasha and I would feel better knowing you're not alone in that apartment." I looked at Natasha, searching her face for any sign of reluctance. She smiled warmly and nodded. "That's actually a wonderful idea, Vivian. You could have your own private space, but you'd be part of our daily lives. It would be so good for the girls to have their grandmother close by." The guest suite was indeed perfect. It had been designed as an in-law apartment with a separate entrance from the garden, a spacious bedroom with built-in bookshelves, a full bathroom with a walk-in shower, and a comfortable sitting room with large windows overlooking the garden. I could be part of the family while maintaining my privacy and independence. I moved in that May, selling most of my furniture but bringing my favorite pieces: Robert's leather reading chair, my grandmother's antique writing desk, and the quilt my mother had made for my wedding. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like I was truly home. Initially, the arrangement was wonderful. I cooked breakfast most mornings, homemade pancakes for the girls, coffee and pastries for Cameron and Natasha. I helped the girls with their homework, drove them to dance classes and soccer practice when their parents were busy, and maintained the extensive gardens that I'd always admired from afar. I also quietly began contributing to household expenses in ways that went far beyond the rent I insisted on paying. I covered the monthly house cleaning service, the lawn care company, and the pool maintenance when the furnace needed replacement. That first winter, I arranged for the best HVAC company in town to install a new system and quietly paid the $8,000 bill. When Natasha wanted to renovate the kitchen the following year, I covered the $25,000 cost, telling them I'd received an unexpected bonus from the final payments on my business sale. But slowly, over those 3 years, I began to notice subtle changes in how Natasha treated me. At first, it was small things. She'd sigh almost imperceptibly when I offered to help with dinner preparation, when I suggested family activities or outings. She'd find reasons why they wouldn't work. When I offered to babysit so she and Cameron could have date nights, she'd thank me but then mention that the girls were too excited when Grandma watched them and had trouble settling down afterward. I started paying closer attention to her body language and her words, the rolls when she thought I wasn't looking, the subtle redirection when I tried to join conversations, the way she'd change subjects when I shared stories about my life with Robert or my experiences running the catering business. Most painfully, I noticed how she managed the girls' relationships with me. If Lily or Rose asked to spend extra time in my suite, looking at old photo albums or learning to bake, Natasha would suddenly remember urgent homework assignments or playdates. When I offered to take them on special outings to museums, or shopping for school clothes, or to the movies, there were always scheduling conflicts. I told myself I was being oversensitive. 3 generations under one roof was never easy, and I was probably more needy for family connection than I realized. I'd been living alone for so many years that perhaps I didn't recognize appropriate boundaries, so I began trying to make myself smaller, less noticeable, less intrusive. I started eating breakfast earlier, before the family came downstairs, so I wouldn't interrupt their morning routine. I moved my dinner time earlier too, preparing meals for them but eating alone in my suite so they could have family time without me. I started wearing headphones when watching television so the sound wouldn't travel to the main part of the house. I even began parking my car at the far end of the driveway so it wouldn't be visible from the front windows. But apparently, even my very presence in the house had become an irritation. Last Tuesday evening, March 12, 2024, Natasha was hosting her monthly book club. This was a tradition she'd started 2 years earlier, inviting 8 women from the neighborhood to discuss literary fiction while enjoying wine and elaborate appetizer spreads. I always helped her prepare for these gatherings, spending the afternoon making homemade canapes, ranging fresh flowers from the garden, and setting up the living room with additional seating and side tables for wine glasses. That Tuesday, I'd outdone myself. I'd prepared bacon-wrapped scallops, brie and fig tartlets, smoked salmon pinwheels, and chocolate-dipped strawberries. The dining room table was set like a magazine spread, with white orchids and flickering candles creating an elegant ambience. When the women arrived at 7:30, I retreated to my suite as always, settling in with a book and a cup of tea. Around 8 p.m., I realized I'd forgotten to fill my water pitcher, so I quietly slipped out to the kitchen, planning to grab some water and return to my room without disturbing anyone. The 8 women were seated in the living room, which was adjacent to the dining room and kitchen. As I moved quietly through the kitchen, I could hear their animated discussion about the month's book selection, a novel about 3 generations of women living in the same house and the tensions that arose from their different expectations and needs. I should have filled my pitcher and left immediately. But as I reached for the refrigerator door, I heard one of the women, Jonna Kingsley, who lived 3 houses down, say something that stopped me cold. The grandmother character in this book reminded me so much of my own mother-in-law situation. You know how they can be always hovering, always inserting themselves into every family moment. Sometimes I just want to scream, "We know you're there. You don't have to announce your presence constantly." The room erupted in knowing laughter. I stood frozen by the refrigerator, my hand still on the handle, as the conversation continued. Another woman, whose voice I recognized as belonging to Michelle Torres from Maple Street, chimed in, "Oh my God, yes, mine does this thing where she coughs or clears her throat constantly, like she's making sure we don't forget she exists. And the way she shuffles around in those house slippers at all hours, shuffle, shuffle, shuffle down the hallway. I swear it's like living with a ghost who wants to make sure you know the house is haunted." More laughter, and then I heard Natasha's voice, clearer and sharper than I'd ever heard it before. "Oh ladies, you should try living with 1/24/7. I mean, I love Cameron's mother dearly. But honestly, sometimes it's suffocating. Every morning, it's the shuffling slippers coming down the hallway at 6 a.m. Every evening it's the television playing too loud because she won't admit she needs hearing aids. And don't get me started on the constant throat clearing, it's like a nervous tick." My heart stopped. They were talking about me. The worst part, Natasha continued, clearly emboldened by the group's attention, is that we can never just be a normal nuclear family anymore. Every conversation, every decision, every private moment has this audience of one. When Cameron and I try to discuss parenting decisions or household issues, there she is, listening from the kitchen or offering unsolicited advice. When the girls are upset about something, she swoops in trying to fix it before we can handle it as parents. I felt like I was going to be sick. The woman I'd been secretly supporting for 15 years was describing me as a burden, an intrusion, an obstacle to her family's happiness. John asked, "Have you talked to Cameron about it? How can I?" Natasha replied with a bitter laugh, "She's his mother. He adores her, and honestly, she does help a lot around the house. She pays rent, she cooks, she babysits, she even covers expenses we can't quite afford. But there's something so suffocating about having someone constantly grateful and helpful living in your space." "Does that make me sound horrible?" "Not at all," Michelle reassured her. "There's a difference between help and, what's the word, enmeshment. When someone becomes so integrated into your daily life that you can't function normally as a family unit." A third woman, whose voice I didn't immediately recognize, added, "At least your mother-in-law contributes financially. Mine just sits there expecting to be entertained and taken care of. Though I have to say, Natasha, your house always looks Perfect, and you somehow managed to host these beautiful gatherings even with the situation. Well, Natasha said, and I could hear the pride in her voice, I've gotten very good at managing around the complications. I've learned to schedule family activities when she's likely to be napping or reading in her room. I've gotten strategic about timing conversations with Cameron so we can have privacy. And honestly, these book club evenings are one of the few times I feel like this house is truly ours, you know. I wanted to flee back to my suite, but I was frozen in place, my water pitcher clutched in my trembling hands. Then I heard the sound that would haunt me forever: 8 women laughing at my expense, bonding over their shared irritation with intrusive mothers-in-law while sitting in my house, eating food I'd prepared, surrounded by flowers I'd arranged. That's when I accidentally bumped into the kitchen island, knocking over a small vase with a single rose that I'd placed there that morning. The crash seemed to echo through the house. The living room went completely silent, then Natasha's voice, sharp as broken glass, Vivian, what are you doing lurking around out there? We're trying to have a private conversation. I had no choice but to step into view. My face was burning with shame and humiliation as I faced the 8 women, all staring at me with expressions ranging from embarrassment to pity to barely concealed annoyance. I was just getting some water, I managed to whisper. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Well, you're here now, Natasha said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Ladies, this is my mother-in-law, Vivian Ashford. She lives with us in our guest suite. Vivian, these are my book club friends. The women smiled politely, but I could see the pity and discomfort in their eyes. I was the pathetic elderly woman they'd been dissecting, the unwanted houseguest who'd been caught eavesdropping on her own character assassination. I'll just get my water and go back to my room, I said, backing toward the sink, but Natasha wasn't finished humiliating me. Actually, Vivian, she said, her voice stopping me mid-step, since you're here, could you try to move a little more quietly when you're walking around? Your footsteps are quite loud. And we're trying to have a discussion. Also, maybe breathe a little softer. You're breathing quite heavily, and it's honestly distracting everyone. The room went dead silent. 8 pairs of eyes stared at me, some shocked by Natasha's cruelty, others nodding slightly in agreement, all of them witnessing my complete and utter humiliation. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, clutching my empty water pitcher, feeling like I might collapse from the shame. The woman who had been secretly paying for the roof over their heads for 15 years had just been told that her breathing was annoying. Of course, I whispered, I'm so sorry, and I fled. I stumbled back to my suite, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the door handle. Once inside, I collapsed into Robert's old leather chair and sat in the darkness, staring at nothing, feeling like my entire world had just crumbled around me. For 3 hours, I sat in that chair, replaying every interaction I'd had with Natasha over the past 3 years, seeing it all with new eyes. Every sigh, every eye roll, every subtle redirection. She hadn't been adjusting to having me in her home. She'd been tolerating me, resenting me, counting the days until I would leave or die. But what hurt most was the realization that I wasn't a beloved family member living in my son's house. I was a paying tenant who'd been told to shut up and disappear. At 11:30 p.m., after the book club guests had finally left, I heard Natasha and Cameron's voices in their bedroom, directly above my suite. Their conversation drifted down through the old house's thin floors. How did it go tonight? Cameron asked. Oh, you know how it is with the girls, Natasha replied casually. We had a good discussion about the book. Your mother interrupted us briefly when she was getting water, but it was fine. No mention of what she'd said about me, no acknowledgement of how she'd humiliated me in front of her friends, no recognition that she'd crossed a line from which there was no return. That's when I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled out the box of financial documents I'd kept hidden there for 15 years, bank statements showing every $4,200 payment I'd made. The original loan documents with my name as the cosigner. The property deed that listed me as a co-owner, something I'd arranged for legal protection but never mentioned to Cameron. For 15 years, I had been the ghost owner of this house, the secret benefactor who made their comfortable life possible. I'd covered mortgage payments totaling over $750,000, plus countless home improvements, repairs, and upgrades. I'd gifted them a lifestyle they could never have afforded on their own. And in return, I'd been told that my breathing was too loud. As I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by evidence of my generosity, I made a decision that would change everything. Their dream home was actually my house, gifted to them one payment at a time. And gifts, I realized, could always be taken back. But what Natasha didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I held all the cards. The mortgage was in my name as much as Cameron's. The down payment had been mine. Every monthly payment for 15 years had come from my account. Most importantly, I had the power to stop those payments anytime I chose. And after tonight, after being told I was breathing too loud in my own house, I was ready to use that power. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of reclaiming everything I had given them. Tomorrow, Natasha would learn what it really meant to lose a home. But tonight, I sat in the darkness and planned exactly how I would dismantle the life I had spent 15 years building for them, one phone call at a time. The morning after the book club incident, I woke up at 4:47 a.m. with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time since moving into what I'd believed was my son's home, I saw the situation with perfect, painful precision. I wasn't a beloved grandmother living with family. I was a financial hostage, trapped in a prison of my own generosity. I lay in Robert's old leather chair, where I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, and made my first decision: no more morning breakfast routine. If my shuffling slippers and presence were such an annoyance to Natasha, I would give her exactly what she seemed to want: my absence. At 6 a.m., I heard the familiar sounds of the household waking up. Cameron's alarm, followed by his shower. The girls giggling as they got ready for school. Natasha's heels clicking across the hardwood floors as she prepared coffee and packed lunches. For 3 years, I had been part of this morning symphony, contributing my own notes: the sizzle of pancakes on the griddle, the whistle of the kettle, the cheerful good morning that had started each day. Today, I remained silent in my suite. At 6:30, there was a soft knock on my door. "Grandma Vivian?" It was Rose, her sweet 12-year-old voice filled with concern. "Are you okay? Mom made toast, but there aren't any pancakes." My heart ached. The girls had done nothing wrong. They were innocent victims of the toxic dynamic that had been building in this house for years, but I couldn't continue pretending everything was normal when their mother had made it clear that my very breathing was unwelcome. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I called back gently. "Just a little tired this morning." "You have a wonderful day at school." I heard her pause, then her footsteps retreating down the hallway. A few minutes later, Cameron knocked. "Mom, everything all right?" "Rose said you weren't feeling well." "I'm okay, dear. Just need some rest. Have a good day at work." Another pause, then his footsteps, too, faded away. At 7:15, after I heard the garage door close and knew they'd all left for the day, I finally emerged from my suite. The kitchen was a disaster: toast crumbs scattered across the counter, sticky jam jars left open, coffee rings on the granite surface I'd paid to have installed. This was what the morning routine looked like without my contribution. I poured myself coffee and sat at the kitchen island, staring at the spot where I'd knocked over the vase the night before. The broken pieces had been swept up, but I could still see tiny shards of glass glinting in the corner where the broom hadn't quite reached, like the remnants of my shattered illusions about my place in this family. That's when I noticed the mail scattered on the counter: bills that had arrived yesterday while I was preparing for the book CL. Without thinking, I began sorting through them, a habit from my years managing household finances for Robert and myself. Electric bill, $347. Water and sewer, $203. Internet and cable, $156. Lawn service, $280. Pool maintenance, $195. House cleaning service, $320. I knew these numbers intimately because I had been paying most of them for the past 3 years, quietly covering expenses that stretched beyond Cameron and Natasha's budget. They believed Cameron's salary covered these costs, but the reality was that my contributions had been subsidizing their lifestyle in ways they never acknowledged or appreciated. Then I saw an envelope that made my blood run cold, a notice from Riverside Gardens Homeowners Association. I opened it with trembling hands. Final notice. Annual HO dues in the amount of $2,400 are now 90 days past due. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in legal action and potential foreclosure proceedings. 90 days past due. That meant Cameron and Natasha had been ignoring this bill since December, and it was now March. They were facing potential foreclosure over a $2,400 fee less than I typically spend on a single month of household expenses I covered for them. But what shocked me more was finding a second envelope, this one from Hartford County Tax Assessor. Delinquent property tax notice. Property taxes in the amount of $8,847 are now 120 days past due. Interest and penalties have accrued to $1,293. Total amount due, $10,140. Failure to pay within 60 days will result in tax lien and potential property seizure. My hands shook as I read the notice again. Property taxes for months overdue. Combined with the whole dues, they owed over $12,500 in basic homeownership obligations, money they clearly didn't have. This was the moment I realized how precarious their financial situation really was. Despite my mortgage payments, despite my contributions to household expenses, despite my constant financial support, Cameron and Natasha were drowning. They were living paycheck to paycheck, barely keeping their heads above water while maintaining the facade of suburban success. And last night, this woman who couldn't even pay her property taxes had told me I was breathing too loudly in my own house. I spent the next hour going through every bill, every financial document I could find in their kitchen office area. The picture that emerged was devastating. Credit card debt on 5 different cards totaling $34,000. A car loan for Natasha's BMW with payments of $687 per month. Private school tuition for Lily and Rose at $18,000 per year each. Cameron's student loan payments of $420 per month. Apparently, he was still paying off his college education at age 47. They were spending approximately $11,000 per month while Cameron's take-home pay was roughly $7,200. The $3,800 gap was supposed to be covered by what they believed were savings and careful budgeting. But in reality, my secret contributions had been bridging that gap for years. Without my mortgage payments of $4,200 monthly, my coverage of utilities, lawn care, pool maintenance, and house cleaning, plus my frequent gifts for home improvements and emergency repairs, their monthly obligations would have exceeded $15,000. They were living a lifestyle that was financially impossible without my support, and they had no idea. At 9:30 a.m., I called my financial advisor, Harrison Wells, who had been managing my investments since Robert's death. Vivian, his warm voice filled my suite. How lovely to hear from you. How are you settling into life with your son's family? That's actually why I'm calling, Harrison. I need to discuss some changes to my financial arrangements. Of course. What can I help you with? I took a deep breath. I want to stop making the mortgage payments on my son's house. There was a long pause. I see. May I ask what's prompted this decision? It's complicated, I said, staring at the delinquent tax notice, but I've realized that my financial support isn't appreciated the way I thought it was. I want to step back. Well, that's certainly your prerogative. The mortgage arrangement was always meant to be a gift, not an obligation. Would you like me to simply stop the automatic transfers? Not yet, I said quickly. I want to understand all the implications first. What would happen if I stopped making payments immediately? Harrison's tone became more serious. Well, the mortgage company would send notices to both you and Cameron. You're both on the loan documents. After 30 days, they'd report it as delinquent to credit agencies. After 90 days, they could begin foreclosure proceedings. Given that the house is worth approximately $650,000 now and the remaining loan balance is around $180,000, they'd likely try to work out a payment plan rather than foreclose. But Cameron would need to demonstrate ability to make the payments going forward. And if he can't, then yes, they could foreclose. Vivian, forgive me for asking, but does Cameron know about your financial arrangement? Does he understand that you've been covering the mortgage? No, I whispered. He thinks he's been paying it himself for 15 years. Another long pause. Oh my. That does complicate things considerably. After hanging up with Harrison, I sat in my suite for another hour, staring at the financial documents spread across my coffee table. The evidence was overwhelming. Without my support, Cameron and Natasha would lose their home within months. They were already behind on property taxes and HOA dues. Their credit cards were maxed out. They had no savings to speak of. But more importantly, I realized I had been enabling a lifestyle they couldn't afford, creating a false sense of security that allowed them to make increasingly poor financial decisions. The BMW lease, the private school tuition, the expensive vacations they took twice a year, all of it was possible only because I was secretly subsidizing their mortgage. At 11 a.m., my phone rang. It was Cameron. Hey Mom, I wanted to check on you again. You seemed off this morning. Is everything okay? The concern in his voice almost broke my resolve. This was my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after Robert died. Despite everything, I love him deeply. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just had a restless night. Listen, I was thinking maybe we should plan a family dinner this weekend. Just the four of us, no distractions. Natasha mentioned that you seemed a little overwhelmed lately. Maybe we need to have a conversation about how to make our living arrangement work better for everyone. My stomach dropped. So Natasha had talked to him about me, spinning the narrative to make it seem like I was the problem that needed to be managed. What kind of conversation? I asked carefully. Well, just making sure everyone's comfortable and has enough space. Maybe talking about boundaries and expectations. Nothing major, just some adjustments to help us all coexist better. Boundaries and expectations. Code words for how do we make Mom less of a burden. I see, I said quietly. And what kind of adjustments did you have in mind? Oh, I don't know yet. Maybe we could discuss it as a family. Natasha has some ideas about how to create more privacy for everyone, maybe establish some routines that work better. I closed my eyes, picturing this family meeting where I would be presented with a list of rules designed to make me invisible in my own house. No more morning breakfasts, scheduled times for using common areas, restrictions on interacting with the girls, essentially, a rental agreement for my own generosity. That sounds reasonable. I heard myself say, great, I'll talk to Natasha about when we can sit down together. Maybe Sunday afternoon after the girls finished their soccer games. After he hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday, 5 days away. I had until then to decide how much truth I was ready to reveal. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. At 1 p.m., I drove to downtown Hartford to visit my attorney, Rebecca Martinez, who had handled the legal aspects of my business sale and had been managing my estate planning. Vivian, what a pleasant surprise, Rebecca greeted me in her corner office overlooking the Connecticut River. I wasn't expecting to see you until our annual review in June. I need some legal advice, Rebecca, about the house my son lives in. I explained the entire situation, the secret mortgage payments, the financial arrangement I'd hidden from Cameron, the delinquent taxes and HOA dues, and my growing realization that I was being taken for granted. Rebecca listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. This is quite a complex situation, Vivian. Let me make sure I understand correctly. You've been making mortgage payments on a house where your son believes he's the primary financial responsible party, but legally, you're listed as a co-borrower and co-owner. Exactly. And you've been living in the house for 3 years, paying additional expenses, while your daughter-in-law has become increasingly resentful of your presence. That's right. Rebecca pulled out a thick file labeled Ashford Estate Planning and began reviewing documents. Looking at the property deed and mortgage paperwork we handled in 2009, you have substantial legal rights in this situation. As a co-owner, you have the right to live in the property. As a co-borrower, you have the right to make decisions about the mortgage payments. But what are my options if I want to withdraw my support? Several. First, you could simply stop making the mortgage payments and allow Cameron to take over, assuming he can qualify and afford them. Second, you could demand immediate buyout of your ownership stake, which would be half the current market value minus the remaining loan balance. Third, you could force the sale of the property and split the proceeds. My head was spinning. And if I choose to continue living there while stopping financial support? That's where it gets interesting. As a co-owner, you have the legal right to occupy the property regardless of whether you're contributing to expenses. But I suspect that would create considerable family tension. More than there already is, I said grimly. Rebecca leaned forward. Vivian, can I speak frankly? In my 20 years of practice, I've seen many similar situations. Adult children who become financially dependent on aging parents often develop a sense of entitlement. They begin to see the parents' support not as a gift, but as an obligation. When that support is threatened, the reaction can be quite ugly. What do you mean? I mean that when Cameron and his wife realize how dependent they've been on your financial support, they may not respond with gratitude. They may respond with anger, blame, and attempts to guilt you into continuing the arrangement. I thought about the upcoming family meeting, about Natasha's talk of boundaries and expectations, about being told I was breathing too loudly. What would you recommend? Rebecca was quiet for a moment, studying my file. That depends on what outcome you want. Do you want to continue living with them while establishing better treatment? Do you want to move out but continue some level of support? Or do you want to sever the financial relationship entirely? I honestly don't know yet. Then here's what I suggest. Give yourself time to decide, but start documenting everything. Keep records of all your financial contributions. Save copies of their delinquent bills. If this situation escalates, you'll want evidence of exactly how much you've been supporting them. She handed me a business card. I'm also going to give you the contact information for a private investigator I work with. Occasionally, if you decide to take more dramatic action, you may want to understand the full scope of their financial situation. A private investigator, isn't that a bit extreme? Vivian, you've discovered $12,500 in delinquent taxes and fees that they've been hiding from you. You may want to know what else they're hiding. I left Rebecca's office with my head reeling and a heavy heart. The woman who had raised me had always taught me that family was everything, that you did whatever you could to help the people you loved. But she'd never prepared me for what to do when that love and support was met with contempt. At 3:30 p.m., I stopped by First National Bank, where I'd maintained my accounts for over 30 years. I wanted to speak with someone about the mortgage arrangement and understand exactly what my options were. The branch manager, Patricia Donovan, had known me since Robert and I first opened our business accounts in the 1980s. She welcomed me into her office with the warmth of an old friend. Vivian, how are you enjoying living with Cameron's family? The question that everyone asked, the question I'd been answering with forced cheerfulness for 3 years. Actually, Patricia, that's why I'm here. I need to discuss the mortgage arrangement on Cameron's house. I explained the situation again, watching Patricia's expression grow more concerned as I spoke. Oh my, she said when I finished. This is quite a delicate situation. I remember setting up this arrangement 15 years ago. It was unusual, but you were so determined to help your son while allowing him to maintain his dignity. And now I'm wondering if that was a mistake. Patricia pulled up the account information on her computer. Well, let's see what we're dealing with. The current loan balance is $178,340. Monthly payments of $4,200 include principal, interest, property taxes, and homeowner's insurance. You've made 180 consecutive payments totaling $756,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $750,000. I'd given them $750,000 over 15 years, and last night I'd been told I was breathing too loudly. Patricia, if I stopped making payments immediately, what would happen? The bank would send a default notice after 30 days. We'd attempt to contact both borrowers, you and Cameron, to discuss the situation. If no payment arrangements were made, we'd begin foreclosure proceedings after 90 days, but Cameron doesn't know I've been making the payments. He thinks his monthly payments have been going directly to you. Patricia's eyes widened. He doesn't. No, but Vivian, that means he has no idea that he's not actually qualified to carry this mortgage on his own. When we originally approved the loan, it was based on your combined income and assets. Cameron's salary alone wouldn't have qualified him for a $485,000 mortgage. Another revelation that felt like a slap. Cameron couldn't have bought this house without me. Couldn't have maintained it without me, and couldn't keep it without me. Yet somehow, I had become the unwelcome intruder in his home. What would you recommend, Patricia, honestly? I think you need to have a conversation with Cameron about the true nature of this arrangement. Before you make any changes, he deserves to understand the reality of his financial situation. And if he can't afford to take over the payments, then you'll need to decide whether to continue supporting them. Help them sell the house, or, she paused delicately, allow the foreclosure to proceed. I drove home that afternoon with my mind churning. In the span of one day, I discovered that Cameron and Natasha were financially insolvent, legally vulnerable, and completely dependent on my continued support. Yet they were planning a family meeting to establish boundaries for my behavior in what they believed was their house. The irony was almost laughable. Almost. When I arrived back at the house at 4:15 p.m., both girls were home from school, sitting at the kitchen island doing homework. They looked up with bright smiles when I walked in. "Grandma Vivian," Lily exclaimed. "Mom said you weren't feeling well this morning. Are you better now?" "Much better, sweetheart," I said, kissing the top of her head. "How was school?" For the next hour, I helped them with their math homework and listened to their chatter about upcoming spring events: Rose's art show, Lily's soccer tournament, a field trip to the Mystic Seaport. Normal, innocent childhood experiences that cost money their parents didn't have. At 5:30, Cameron arrived home from work, followed shortly by Natasha, who had been shopping with her friend Michelle Torres, one of the book club members from the previous night. "Hi, Mom," Cameron said, kissing my cheek. "Feeling better?" "Yes, much better. Thank you for asking." Natasha nodded politely in my direction but didn't make eye contact. She began unpacking shopping bags on the kitchen counter. Expensive groceries from Whole Foods, a new handbag that looked like it cost several $100s, and boutique clothing bags for the girls. I watched this display of spending with new eyes. Here was a woman whose property taxes were for months overdue, maxing out credit cards to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford, while resenting the person who made it all possible. "Natasha," I said carefully, "I noticed some mail on the counter this morning. It looks like there might be some overdue bills that when Cameron and his wife realize how dependent they've been on your financial support, they may not respond with gratitude. They may respond with anger, blame, and attempts to guilt you into continuing the arrangement." I thought about the upcoming family meeting, about Natasha's talk of boundaries and expectations, about being told I was breathing too loudly. "What would you recommend?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment, studying my file. "That depends on what outcome you want. Do you want to continue living with them while establishing better treatment? Do you want to move out but continue some level of support? Or do you want to sever the financial relationship entirely? I honestly don't know yet." "Then here's what I suggest. Give yourself time to decide, but start documenting everything. Keep records of all your financial contributions. Save copies of their delinquent bills. If this situation escalates, you'll want evidence of exactly how much you've been supporting them." She handed me a business card. "I'm also going to give you the contact information for a private investigator I work with. Occasionally, if you decide to take more dramatic action, you may want to understand the full scope of their financial situation. A private investigator, isn't that a bit extreme?" "Vivian, you've discovered $12,500 in delinquent taxes and fees that they've been hiding from you. You may want to know what else they're hiding." I left Rebecca's office with my head reeling and a heavy heart. The woman who had raised me had always taught me that family was everything, that you did whatever you could to help the people you loved. But she'd never prepared me for what to do when that love and support was met with contempt. At 3:30 p.m., I stopped by First National Bank, where I'd maintained my accounts for over 30 years. I wanted to speak with someone about the mortgage arrangement and understand exactly what my options were. The branch manager, Patricia Donovan, had known me since Robert and I first opened our business accounts in the 1980s. She welcomed me into her office with the warmth of an old friend. "Vivian, how are you enjoying living with Cameron's family?" The question that everyone asked, the question I'd been answering with forced cheerfulness for 3 years. "Actually, Patricia, that's why I'm here. I need to discuss the mortgage arrangement on Cameron's house." I explained the situation again, watching Patricia's expression grow more concerned as I spoke. "Oh my," she said when I finished. "This is quite a delicate situation. I remember setting up this arrangement 15 years ago. It was unusual, but you were so determined to help your son while allowing him to maintain his dignity. And now I'm wondering if that was a mistake." Patricia pulled up the account information on her computer. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of discovering the full truth about my situation. But tonight, I sat in the darkness and mourned the loss of the family I thought I'd been part of. The family meeting was 4 days away. By then, I would know everything. And they would learn that the sweet, generous grandmother they'd been taking advantage of was far more powerful than they'd ever imagined. The woman who'd been told she was breathing too loudly was about to show them what it sounded like. When she finally found her voice, Thursday morning arrived with an unexpected development that would change everything I thought I knew about my situation. I woke up to find a manila envelope that had been slipped under my suite door sometime during the night. No return address, just my name written in block letters across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief, typed message. "Mrs. Ashford, you should know that your daughter-in-law has been meeting with a real estate agent, Wednesday, 2 p.m., Riverside Realty. Thought you should be aware." A concerned neighbor. My hands trembled as I read the note again. Natasha had been meeting with a real estate agent the day after humiliating me at her book club. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. I immediately called Marcus Sterling, the private investigator I'd hired the previous evening. "Mr. Sterling, it's Vivian Ashford. I need you to prioritize something specific. I have reason to believe my daughter-in-law met with a real estate agent yesterday. Can you find out what that meeting was about?" "Absolutely. Real estate transactions leave paper trails. Give me her full name and I'll have information for you by this afternoon." After hanging up, I sat in my suite trying to process this new information. What could Natasha possibly be planning with a real estate agent? She and Cameron couldn't sell the house without my consent. I was a co-owner, unless they were exploring options I hadn't considered. At 8:30 a.m., I decided to test the waters. Instead of staying hidden in my suite, I emerged to make breakfast for the girls, just as I had for the past 3 years. I wanted to observe the family dynamics with fresh eyes, now that I understood the financial reality of their situation. Lily and Rose were delighted to see me in the kitchen, immediately requesting their favorite blueberry pancakes. Cameron smiled warmly and kissed my cheek, seeming genuinely relieved that I appeared to be back to my normal routine. But Natasha's reaction was telling. She watched me move around the kitchen with barely concealed irritation, her jaw tight every time I opened a cabinet or reached for a utensil. When I asked if she wanted coffee, she replied curtly, "I can handle my own coffee, thank you, Mom," Cameron said, pouring orange juice for the girls. "I'm glad you're feeling better." Natasha and I were talking last night about our conversation. On Sunday, we want to make sure everyone feels comfortable and respected in this house. "Of course," I replied carefully, flipping pancakes. "What specifically did you want to discuss?" Natasha finally spoke up, her voice artificially sweet. "Well, we've been thinking about ways to create more independence for everyone. Better boundaries that allow each family unit to function more naturally." "Family unit?" I asked, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Rose. You know, the core family: Cameron, myself, and the girls. And then you, as an individual with your own space and routines. The way she said individual made it sound like a clinical diagnosis. I wasn't a beloved grandmother. I was a separate entity that needed to be managed and contained. I see, I said quietly. And what kind of boundaries were you thinking about? Cameron jumped in, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Nothing dramatic, Mom. Just maybe some coordination around common spaces, kitchen times, family meal schedules. That sort of thing, so I wouldn't be welcome to cook breakfast for the girls anymore. It's not about being welcome, Natasha said quickly. It's about establishing routines that work for everyone. The girls are getting older, they need to learn independence, and honestly, it might be better if they weren't so dependent on grandparent intervention for everything. Grandparent intervention. That's what my love and care had become in her mind. I understand, I said, watching Lily and Rose eat their pancakes with obvious enjoyment. And when exactly would this new arrangement begin? We thought we'd discuss the details on Sunday. Cameron said, come up with a plan that everyone can live with. After they left for work and school, I spent the morning cleaning the kitchen and thinking about the anonymous note. Who could have sent it? It had to be someone who knew about my situation and cared enough to warn me. Someone who had access to information about Natasha's activities. At 11 a.m., my phone rang. It was Marcus Sterling. Mrs. Ashford, I have some interesting information about your daughter-in-law's meeting yesterday. I'm listening. She met with Jennifer Walsh at Riverside Realty for approximately 90 minutes. According to my source at the agency, Mrs. Cameron Ashford, that's how she identified herself, was inquiring about property values in your neighborhood and discussing the possibility of a quick sale. My stomach dropped. A quick sale, yes. Specifically, she wanted to know about expedited sales, cash buyers, and how quickly a property could change hands if all parties were motivated. She also asked about something called a family partnership dissolution. What does that mean? It's a legal process where family members who co-own property can force a sale and split the proceeds, even if not all parties agree. It's typically used in divorce situations or when family business partnerships dissolve acrimoniously. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So she's looking into ways to force me out of the house, it appears so. But here's the interesting part. She seemed surprised when Ms. Walsh explained that all co-owners would need to consent to a sale, and that any co-owner could block the transaction. According to my source, Mrs. Cameron Ashford seemed to think she and her husband had sole ownership. Because she doesn't know I'm a co-owner, I said quietly. Exactly. Ms. Walsh asked to see the property deed, and your daughter-in-law said she'd need to get it from her husband. The meeting ended with her saying she'd be back in touch once she'd reviewed the paperwork. After hanging up, I sat in my suite staring out at the garden I'd lovingly maintained for 3 years. The spring bulbs I'd planted last fall were just beginning to emerge, daffodils and tulips that would bloom in a few weeks. I'd planted them thinking I'd be here to see them flower. Now it appeared that while I was being told I breathed too loudly, Natasha was actively plotting to get rid of me entirely. At 1 p.m., I received another call, this one from my attorney Rebecca Martinez. Vivian, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I wanted to discuss some options with you. Actually, Rebecca, I have some new information that might change things. I told her about the anonymous note and Marcus Sterling's findings about Natasha's real estate meeting. Oh my, Rebecca said when I finished. This does complicate matters significantly. If she's exploring forced sale options, she's going to discover very quickly that you have substantial rights as a co-owner. What happens when she finds out? Well, that depends on how she and Cameron react to the news. They might try to buy out your share of the property. They might ask you to voluntarily relinquish your ownership, or they might escalate. If they've been counting on your financial support while resenting your presence, discovering that you actually own half their house could create a very ugly situation. What would you recommend? I think you need to be prepared for the possibility that Sunday's family meeting is going to be more confrontational than you expected. If Natasha has been researching forced sale options, she may be planning to present You with an ultimatum. What kind of ultimatum? Something like, sign over your share of the house or we'll make your life miserable until you leave. These situations can get quite nasty. Vivian, especially when significant money is involved. After hanging up with Rebecca, I realized I needed more information about what exactly Cameron and Natasha knew or suspected about my financial contributions. That afternoon, I decided to do so. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of discovering the full truth about my situation. But tonight, I sat in the darkness and mourned the loss of the family I thought I'd been part of. The family meeting was 4 days away. By then, I would know everything. And they would learn that the sweet, generous grandmother they'd been taking advantage of was far more powerful than they'd ever imagined. The woman who'd been told she was breathing too loudly was about to show them what it sounded like. When she finally found her voice, Thursday morning arrived with an unexpected development that would change everything I thought I knew about my situation. I woke up to find a manila envelope that had been slipped under my suite door sometime during the night. No return out. He looked uncomfortable. Well, like I said, we just want to establish some routines that work better for everyone. But I get the feeling there's more to it than that. Are you unhappy with our current arrangement? Cameron stared into his coffee cup. Mom, you know I love having you close by. The girls adore you, and you've been such a help with everything. But Natasha feels like she can never truly relax in her own home. She says it's like living with a roommate who's always watching and judging. I don't judge, I know you don't mean to, he said quickly. But you have to understand, when you offer to help with things, or when you make suggestions about the girls or the house, it can feel like criticism of how we're handling things. What kinds of suggestions? Well, like last month when you mentioned that the girls might benefit from more structured homework time, or when you offered to pay for Rose's art classes because you thought her talent was being wasted. Natasha felt like you were implying she wasn't nurturing Rose's abilities properly. I remembered both conversations. I'd been trying to be supportive and helpful, but I could see how they might have been interpreted as criticism. Cameron, I had no idea Natasha felt that way. Why didn't she talk to me directly? You know how she is. She doesn't like confrontation. She'd rather just adjust the situation so everyone's more comfortable. And what kind of adjustments is she thinking about? Cameron shifted uncomfortably. Well, maybe more defined personal space, maybe separate meal times so you can have your own routine without feeling obligated to cook for everyone. Maybe some evenings where the 4 of us have family time without me. He was too kind to say it directly, but the message was clear. I see, I said quietly. And if I'm not comfortable with these adjustments, Cameron looked panicked. Mom, we don't want you to leave, we just want to find a way to make this work better for everyone. But what if we can't find a way that works? He was quiet for a long moment. I guess we'd have to figure something else out. Like what? I don't know. Maybe helping you find a nice apartment nearby, or maybe there's some kind of senior living community where you'd be happier. The words hit me like physical blows. My own son was discussing moving me to a senior living facility because his wife found my presence inconvenient. Cameron, I said carefully, do you remember when you bought the house? How you were able to afford it? Of course, we saved for years, and you helped with the down payment. We've been so grateful for that gift, Mom, and the monthly payments. You've been managing those comfortably. Well, it's tight sometimes. But yeah, we make it work. I studied his face, looking for any sign that he suspected the truth about our financial arrangement. But his expression was completely sincere. He genuinely believed he'd been paying that mortgage for 15 years. What about the property taxes and hold dues? I noticed some notices that looked overdue. Cameron's face flushed. Yeah, we had some cash flow issues recently. Natasha's been handling the bills, and there was some confusion with the bank. But we're working it out. Working it out how? Well, we might need to restructure some things. Maybe take out a home equity loan to cover the immediate expenses and give us some breathing room. A home equity loan on a house they couldn't afford to maintain, using my equity as collateral for more debt they couldn't handle. Have you applied for this loan already? Natasha's been looking into it. She thinks we can get approved based on the house's current value. I managed to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was reeling. They were planning to borrow against the equity I'd built up with 15 years of mortgage payments, using that money to dig themselves deeper into debt while simultaneously trying to push me out of the hole. That sounds complicated, I said. Yeah, but Natasha's good with financial stuff. She's got it all figured out. As we walked back to his office, I realized that Cameron was completely in the dark about both their financial reality and Natasha's plans. He genuinely believed they owned the house, genuinely thought they'd been paying the mortgage, and had no idea that his wife was researching ways to force me out. That evening, I received a call from Marcus Sterling with his preliminary financial report. Mrs. Ashford, I have some concerning information about your son and daughter-in-law's financial situation. I'm listening. In addition to the delinquent property taxes and HOA dues you mentioned, they have $47,000 in credit card debt across 7 different cards, not 5. They've taken out a personal loan for $15,000 that they used for a vacation to Europe last summer. Mrs. Cameron Ashford has been making minimum payments on everything, which means they're essentially in a debt spiral. What else? She's also been withdrawing cash advances from their credit card, small amounts, $200 to $300 at a time, but it adds up. In the past 3 months, she's taken nearly $2,000 in cash advances. What would she need cash for? That's the interesting question. People usually take cash advances for things they don't want showing up on credit card statements, gambling, drugs, or payments to people who don't accept credit cards. Like real estate agents, possibly. Or attorneys. Mrs. Ashford, based on what I'm seeing, your daughter-in-law has been hiding the full extent of their financial problems from your son. The debt is much worse than he knows. How much worse? Total debt excluding the mortgage appears to be around $73,000. With their current income and expenses, they're adding about $1,500 to the debt every month. Without some kind of intervention, they'll be facing bankruptcy within 18 months. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of my suite, processing this information. Natasha wasn't just resentful of my presence, she was desperate. She was drowning in debt, hiding financial catastrophe from her husband, and apparently saw me as an obstacle to some kind of solution she was planning. The family meeting on Sunday wasn't going to be about establishing boundaries for my behavior. It was going to be about removing the only obstacle to whatever scheme she devised to save herself from financial ruin. Friday morning brought another anonymous note under my door. Mrs. Ashford, your daughter-in-law met with an attorney yesterday afternoon, Carter and Associates, specializing in elder law and family disputes. Thought you should know. This time, I wasn't surprised. I immediately called Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca, I need to know everything about Carter and Associates, particularly their expertise in elder law and family disputes. I know that firm, Rebecca said grimly. Thomas Carter specializes in situations where elderly family members need to be managed. He handles guardianship proceedings, competency evaluations, and asset protection for families dealing with aging relatives. Asset protection, essentially legal ways to separate elderly family members from their assets. When families believe those assets are being mismanaged or when the elderly person is seen as a burden. My blood ran cold. Are you saying Natasha is exploring ways to have me declared incompetent? I'm saying Thomas Carter doesn't handle routine family disputes. If she's consulting with him, she's looking for legal ammunition to use against you? What kind of ammunition? Well, if she can document that you're becoming forgetful, making poor financial decisions, or behaving erratically, she might try to have Cameron appointed as your guardian. That would give them control over your assets and the legal right to make decisions about your living situation, based on what evidence? That's the problem with elder law cases, that evidence can be quite subjective. Forgetting names. Getting confused about dates, appearing agitated or depressed, these can all be presented as signs of declining mental capacity. I thought about my behavior over the past week, staying in my room, missing breakfast routines, appearing upset and withdrawn. Had Natasha been documenting my reactions to her mistreatment as evidence of mental decline? Rebecca, what should I do? First, document everything. Keep detailed records of your daily activities, your financial transactions, your conversations with family members. Second, consider having your own competency evaluation done by an independent physician, just to establish a baseline. And third, prepare for the possibility that Sunday's family meeting is actually an intervention designed to pressure you into making decisions that benefit them, not you. That afternoon, I made several important phone calls. First, I scheduled an appointment with my physician for a complete physical and cognitive assessment. Second, I called my financial advisor to move my liquid assets to accounts that only I could access. Third, I contacted a second attorney who specialized in protecting elderly clients from financial exploitation. As Friday evening approached, I realized that the family meeting on Sunday was going to be unlike anything I'd expected. This wasn't going to be a discussion about household routines and boundaries. This was going to be an ambush. But what Natasha didn't know was that the sweet, confused grandmother she thought she was manipulating had spent the week building her own legal and financial fortress. Sunday was still 2 days away, but I was no longer the same woman who had been told she was breathing too loudly. I was a woman with $2.8 million in assets, half ownership of a $650,000 house, and a team of professionals helping me understand exactly how much power I actually held. The question was, what was I going to do with that power? As I sat in my suite Friday night, reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered about their financial desperation and Natasha's secret planning, I realized that I had been approaching this situation all wrong. I'd been thinking about how to protect myself from their manipulation, but the truth was, they were the vulnerable ones. They were the ones facing bankruptcy, foreclosure, and financial ruin. I wasn't the victim in this situation. I was the one holding all the cards, and it was time to decide how I wanted to play them. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for March in Connecticut. I woke early, at 5:30 a.m., with the kind of clarity that comes only after making a life-changing decision. Today would be my last full day in this house as the accommodating, invisible grandmother. Tomorrow's family meeting would reveal everything, and nothing would ever be the same. I had spent Friday evening reviewing all the evidence Marcus Sterling had compiled, along with my own financial records and the legal advice from both Rebecca Martinez and the elder law specialist I'd consulted. The picture was crystal clear. Cameron and Natasha were facing financial catastrophe. Natasha was plotting to force me out while gaining control of my assets. And neither of them had any idea that I knew the truth. More importantly, neither of them understood that without my continued mortgage payments, they would lose the house within 3 months. At 6 a.m., I called Marcus Sterling for his final report. Mrs. Ashford, I have some very interesting developments from yesterday's surveillance. I'm listening. Your daughter-in-law met with the elder law attorney Thomas Carter for 2 hours on Friday afternoon, according to my source inside the firm. She presented him with a detailed case for having you declared mentally incompetent due to what she called increasing signs of dementia and financial irresponsibility. My grip tightened. On the phone, what evidence did she claim to have? She told Carter that you've been exhibiting memory lapses, confusion about household finances, erratic behavior including staying isolated in your room for days, and what she described as paranoid accusations about family members. She also claimed you've been making irrational financial decisions and that the family is concerned about your ability to manage your assets. All lies. Completely fabricated, based on what I've observed. But here's the most concerning part. Carter told her that if she could document these behaviors and get your son to support the competency petition, they could likely get emergency guardianship within 30 days. Emergency guardianship, it would give your son immediate legal authority over your finances, health care decisions, and living arrangements. They could move you to a care facility and take control of all your assets pending a full competency hearing. I felt sick. What did she say to that? She asked about the timeline and costs. Carter quoted her $25,000 to handle the entire process, with emergency guardianship potentially granted in as little as 2 weeks if they could demonstrate immediate risk to your well-being. And she has that kind of money. That's where it gets interesting. She asked about payment plans, and Carter suggested that once guardianship was established, the fees could be paid from your assets. Essentially, you'd be paying for your own legal imprisonment. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat in Robert's old chair and felt something shift inside me. The sadness and hurt I'd been carrying for days transformed into something harder, colder, righteous anger at the audacity of what they were planning. They weren't just trying to push me out of the house, they were trying to steal my freedom, my dignity, and my life savings while painting me as mentally incompetent. And they planned to use my own money to do it. At 8 a.m., I made my final preparations. I called Harrison Wells, my financial advisor, and instructed him to stop all automatic payments to Cameron's mortgage account effective immediately. Vivian, are you sure about this timing? If you stop the payments now, they'll receive a default notice within 30 days. I'm absolutely sure, Harrison. And I want you to transfer $500,000 from my investment accounts to my personal checking account. I may need immediate access to cash. That's a significant amount. Sunday was still 2 days away, but I was no longer the same woman who had been told she was breathing too loudly. I was a woman with $2.8 million in assets, half ownership of a $650,000 house, and a team of professionals helping me understand exactly how much power I actually held. The question was, what was I going to do with that power? As I sat in my suite Friday night, reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered about their financial desperation and Natasha's secret planning, I realized that I had been approaching this situation all wrong. I'd been thinking about how to protect myself from their manipulation, but the truth was, they were the vulnerable ones. They were the ones facing bankruptcy, foreclosure, and financial ruin. I wasn't the victim in this situation. I was the one holding all the cards, and it was time to decide how I wanted to play them. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth for March in Connecticut. I woke early, at 5:30 a.m., with the kind of clarity that comes only after making a life-changing decision. Today would be my last full day in this house as the accommodating, invisible grandmother. Tomorrow's family meeting would reveal everything, and nothing would ever be the same. I had spent Friday evening reviewing all the evidence Marcus Sterling had compiled, along with my own financial records and the legal advice from both Rebecca Martinez and the elder law specialist I'd consulted. The picture was crystal clear. Cameron and Natasha were facing financial catastrophe. Natasha was plotting to force me out while gaining control of my assets. And neither of them had any idea that I knew the truth. More importantly, neither of them understood that without my continued mortgage payments, they would lose the house within 3 months. At 6 a.m., I called Marcus Sterling for his final report. Mrs. Ashford, I have some very interesting developments from yesterday's surveillance. I'm listening. Your daughter-in-law met with the elder law attorney Thomas Carter for 2 hours on Friday afternoon, according to my source inside the firm. She presented him with a detailed case for having you declared mentally incompetent due to what she called increasing signs of dementia and financial irresponsibility. My grip tightened. On the phone, what evidence did she claim to have? She told Carter that you've been exhibiting memory lapses, confusion about household finances, erratic behavior including staying isolated in your room for days, and what she described as paranoid accusations about family members. She also claimed you've been making irrational financial decisions and that the family is concerned about your ability to manage your assets. All lies. Completely fabricated, based on what I've observed. But here's the most concerning part. Carter told her that if she could document these behaviors and get your son to support the competency petition, they could likely get emergency guardianship within 30 days. Emergency guardianship, it would give your son immediate legal authority over your finances, healthcare decisions, and living arrangements. They could move you to a care facility and take control of all your assets pending a full competency hearing. I felt sick. What Did she say to that? She asked about the timeline and costs. Carter quoted her $25,000 to handle the entire process, with emergency guardianship potentially granted in as little as 2 weeks if they could demonstrate immediate risk to your well-being. And she has that kind of money. That's where it gets interesting. She asked about payment plans, and Carter suggested that once guardianship was established, the fees could be paid from your assets. Essentially, you'd be paying for your own legal imprisonment. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat in Robert's old chair and felt something shift inside me. The sadness and hurt I'd been carrying for days transformed into something harder, colder, righteous anger at the audacity of what they were planning. They weren't just trying to push me out of the house, they were trying to steal my freedom, my dignity, and my life savings while painting me as mentally incompetent. And they planned to use my own money to do it. At 8 a.m., I made my final preparations. I called Harrison Wells, my financial advisor, and instructed him to stop all automatic payments to Cameron's mortgage account effective immediately. Vivian, are you sure about this timing? If you stop the payments now, they'll receive a default notice within 30 days. I'm absolutely sure, Harrison. And I want you to transfer $500,000 from my investment accounts to my personal checking account. I may need immediate access to cash. That's a significant amount to keep in checking. May I ask what you're planning? I'm planning to protect myself from people who think they can manipulate and control me. Next, I called Rebecca Martinez. Rebecca, I need you to prepare an emergency injunction to prevent anyone from filing competency or guardians hit petition. Well, that's one of the things Natasha wanted to discuss. She's been looking into ways to restructure some of our arrangements so that everyone benefits. What do you mean by restructure? I'm not sure of all the details. Something about home equity loans and asset management. Natasha understands all the financial stuff better than I do. I studied my son's face, the man I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, the man whose house I'd been secretly paying for 15 years. He genuinely had no idea what his wife was planning. Cameron, before we have this meeting tomorrow, I need to ask you something important. Do you love me? His eyes widened. Of course I love you. Mom, why would you even ask that? Because I need to know if you're part of this plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and moved to a facility against my will. His face went pale. What are you talking about? Do you think I'm losing my memory? Do you think I'm making poor financial decisions? Do you think I need a guardian to manage my affairs? Mom, no, of course not. You're sharp as ever. Where is this coming from? I looked into his eyes and saw genuine confusion and concern. Whatever Natasha was planning, she hadn't fully briefed Cameron on the details. I'm just concerned about tomorrow's discussion, I said carefully. I want to make sure we're all being honest with each other. After he left, I spent the evening in quiet preparation. I reviewed my notes, organized my documents, and mentally rehearsed what I was going to say. By midnight, I was ready. Sunday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood. I woke early and prepared for what would either be the most difficult conversation of my life or the most empowering moment I'd experienced since Robert's death. At 9 a.m., I joined the family for breakfast pancakes that I cooked for Lily and Rose one last time. The girls chattered excitedly about their soccer games that afternoon, completely unaware that their world was about to change dramatically. Grandma Vivian, Rose said, after our games, can we work on that photo album you promised to help us make? We'll see, sweetheart, I said, my heart breaking. Let's get through today first. At 11 a.m., Cameron, Natasha, and I gathered in the living room while the girls played in their rooms upstairs. I chose to sit in the chair closest to the front door, a strategic position that would allow me to leave if necessary. Well, Cameron began nervously, I think we all want to find a solution that works for everyone. Absolutely, Natasha said, her voice artificially warm. Vivian, we've been doing some research into options that might give you more independence and social opportunities. What kind of research? I asked. Well, that's one of the things Natasha wanted to discuss. She's been looking into ways to restructure some of our arrangements so that everyone benefits. What do you mean by restructure? I'm not sure of all the details. Something about home equity loans and asset management. Natasha understands all the financial stuff better than I do. I studied my son's face, the man I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for. The man whose house I'd been secretly paying for 15 years. He genuinely had no idea what his wife was planning. Cameron, before we have this meeting tomorrow, I need to ask you something important. Do you love me? His eyes widened. Of course I love you. Mom, why would you even ask that? Because I need to know if you're part of this plan to have me declared mentally incompetent and moved to a facility against my will. His face went pale. What are you talking about? Do you think I'm losing my memory? Do you think I'm making poor financial decisions? Do you think I need a guardian to manage my affairs? Mom, no, of course not. You're sharp as ever. Where is this coming from? I looked into his eyes and saw genuine confusion and concern. Whatever Natasha was planning, she hadn't fully briefed Cameron on the details. I'm just concerned about tomorrow's discussion, I said carefully. I want to make sure we're all being honest with each other. After he left, I spent the evening in quiet preparation. I reviewed my notes, organized my documents, and mentally rehearsed what I was going to say. By midnight, I was ready. Sunday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood. I woke early and prepared for what would either be the most difficult conversation of my life or the most empowering moment I'd experienced since Robert's death. At 9 a.m., I joined the family for breakfast pancakes that I cooked for Lily and Rose one last time. The girls chattered excitedly about their soccer games that afternoon, completely unaware that their world was about to change dramatically. Grandma Vivian, Rose said, after our games, can we work on that photo album you promised to help us make? We'll see, sweetheart, I said, my heart breaking. Let's get through today first. At 11 a.m., Cameron, Natasha, and I gathered in the living room while the girls played in their rooms upstairs. I chose to sit in the chair closest to the front door, a strategic position that would allow me to leave if necessary. Well, Cameron began nervously, I think we all want to find a solution that works for everyone. Absolutely, Natasha said, her voice artificially warm. Vivian, we've been doing some research into options that might give you more independence and social opportunities. What kind of research? I asked. Natasha pulled out a folder filled with brochures and documents. Senior living communities, financial management services, healthcare coordination, basically ways to ensure you have the support and care you need as you age. As I age, I repeated. Do you think I need care and support now? Well, we've all noticed some changes recently. The isolation, the confusion about household routines, some memory issues. What memory issues? Natasha exchanged a glance with Cameron. You've seemed forgetful lately, confused about conversations we've had, uncertain about daily activities. We're concerned that you might be experiencing some cognitive decline. I looked at Cameron. Do you agree with that assessment? Cameron shifted uncomfortably. I think we're all just concerned about your well-being, Mom. You have seemed more withdrawn lately. Since Tuesday night, I said pointedly, since your wife told me I was breathing too loudly and annoying everyone. Natasha's face flushed. That was taken out of context, was it? Because I have a very clear memory of that conversation. In fact, my memory of this entire week has been remarkably sharp. I stood up and walked to the front door, retrieving the briefcase I'd left there earlier. Since we're talking about memory and confusion, let me share some things I've remembered and discovered this week. I returned to my chair and opened the briefcase, pulling out the first document. This is a mortgage statement from First National Bank. It shows that the monthly payment on this house is $4,200, and that payment is automatically deducted from account number 8473921156. Cameron, is that your account number? Cameron looked confused. I don't know my account number off the top of my head. It's not your account number, it's mine. I have been making the mortgage payments on this house for 15 years. Every single month, $756,000 total. The room went dead silent. That's impossible, Natasha said. We pay the mortgage. Cameron's been paying it since we bought the house. I pulled out the second document. This is the property deed. As you can see, I'm listed as a co-owner. I provided the down payment and I've made every mortgage payment for 15 years. Cameron stared at the document, his face pale. Mom, I don't understand. I make a mortgage payment every month. You make a payment to a separate account that I set up. I wanted you to feel independent and proud. So I created a system where you thought you were paying the mortgage while I actually handled the real payments. I pulled out the third document. These are the delinquent property tax and HOA notices that were hidden from me until I found them Thursday morning. You owe $12,540 in overdue fees on a house I've been paying for. Natasha's face had gone from flush to ashen. There must be some mistake. No mistake, but let me show you what else I discovered this week. I pulled out Marcus Sterling's financial report. This is a complete analysis of your debt situation. $73,000 in credit cards, personal loans, and cash advances. You're adding $1,500 to the debt every month. Without intervention, you'll be bankrupt within 18 months. How did you get this information? Natasha demanded. The same way I found out about your meetings with Jennifer Walsh at Riverside Realty to discuss forcing a quick sale of this house. Natasha's eyes widened in panic. And the same way I learned about your consultation with Thomas Carter about having me declared mentally incompetent so you could gain guardianship and control of my assets. Cameron turned to stare at his wife. Natasha, what is she talking about? And I continued, the same way I discovered your application for a $150,000 home equity loan using my house as collateral without my knowledge or consent. Natasha, Cameron's voice was sharp. Is this true? Natasha stood up abruptly, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. Yes, it's true. Do you want to know why? Because we're drowning. Cameron, we can't afford this house. We can't afford the girls' school. We can't afford our life. And your mother said, I paused at the door. You have two choices. You can sell the house immediately and split the proceeds with me as co-owner. That would give you about $235,000 after paying off the remaining mortgage. That's enough to buy a modest home that you can actually afford. What's the second choice? Cameron asked. I take full ownership of the house, and you have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The room was silent except for the sound of Natasha crying. Mom, Cameron said quietly. I had no idea about any of this. I never wanted you to feel unwelcome. I love you. I know you do, sweetheart. But love isn't enough when it comes with conditions, manipulation, and schemes to control my life. I looked at Natasha, who was staring at the floor. I spent 15 years giving you everything I could. I wanted you to succeed, to be happy, to feel secure. But you turned my generosity into resentment and my love into a burden. I picked up my briefcase. I'll be back this evening to collect my belongings. You can let me know your decision by Wednesday. As I reached the door, I heard Cameron say, What about the girls? What do we tell them? I turned back one final time. Tell them the truth. Tell them that Grandma Vivian loves them very much. But she needs to live in a place where she's appreciated and respected. Tell them they'll always be welcome in my new home, where we can make pancakes and breathe as loudly as we want. I walked out the front door of the house I'd been paying for 15 years, got into my car, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Cameron and Natasha standing in the doorway, looking lost and terrified. 3 hours later, I put a cash offer on a beautiful Victorian house 6 miles away, 5 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a kitchen. Perfect for making pancakes for granddaughters who would always be welcome. On Wednesday, Cameron called to tell me they'd chosen to sell the house. On Thursday, Lily and Rose visited my new home for the first time and declared it the best house ever. On Friday, Sandra Chen's news story about elder financial abuse aired on Channel 8, using my situation as an example of how family members can exploit elderly relatives. And on Saturday, exactly 1 week after I'd discovered the truth about my situation, I sat on my new front porch in a rocking chair, breathing as loudly as I wanted, finally free to live my life on my own terms. The woman who had been told she was breathing too loudly had finally found her voice, and it was louder than anyone had expected. 6 months after walking out of the house I'd been secretly paying for. I stood in the sun-drenched kitchen of my Victorian home on Maple Hill Road, making pancakes for Lily and Rose on a perfect Saturday morning in September. The girls had stayed overnight, something that had become a weekly tradition since I'd moved into what they now called Grandma's dream house. Grandma Vivian, Rose said, sitting at the antique farmhouse table I'd bought specifically for our breakfast traditions. Mom said you and Daddy used to live in a much smaller house when he was little. Is that true? I smiled, flipping a pancake, shaped like a butterfly, Rose's favorite. That's right, sweetheart. After your grandfather Robert died, your daddy and I lived in a little apartment while I worked very hard to save money for a better life. But now you have the biggest, most beautiful house of anyone we know, Lily chimed in, spreading strawberry jam on her star-shaped pancakes. And it's all yours. And nobody can tell you to breathe quietly or anything silly like that. My heart swelled. The girls had adapted to the new arrangements with the resilience that children possess, and seemed to genuinely enjoy the freedom and joy they found in my new home. Here, we could be as loud as we wanted, make messes while cooking, and spend hours looking through photo albums of their grandfather Robert without anyone sighing or checking their watch. That's exactly right, I said, setting their plates in front of them. This is a house where everyone can breathe freely. As the girls ate their breakfast, I reflected on the extraordinary changes that had occurred over the past 6 months. The Victorian house I'd purchased with cash had turned out to be even more perfect than I'd imagined. Built in 1898, it featured 5 bedrooms, original hardwood floors, stained glass windows, and a wraparound porch that had become my favorite place to drink morning coffee and watch the sunrise. More importantly, it had become a sanctuary not just for me, but for my granddaughters, who visited every other weekend and during school holidays. I decorated the 2 upstairs bedrooms specifically for them, Rose's room in soft purples and whites with built-in bookshelves, and Lily's room in sage green with an art station where she could paint and draw to her heart's content. The transformation in my own life had been remarkable. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt truly at peace. I joined the local garden club, started taking watercolor painting classes, and even begun volunteering at the Hartford Public Library's literacy program. I was making new friends, pursuing interests I'd set aside for years, and living entirely on my own terms. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with Cameron. Our bond, which had been strained by years of Natasha's manipulation and resentment, was slowly healing. At 10 a.m., as if summoned by my thoughts, my phone rang. It was Cameron, calling for our weekly check-in conversation. "Hi, Mom," his voice sounded lighter than it had in years. "How are the girls this morning?" "Perfect as always," I said, watching them clear their breakfast dishes without being asked, a house rule they'd eagerly embraced. "We're planning to work in the garden this afternoon and then make homemade pizza for dinner." "That sounds wonderful. Listen, I wanted to give you an update on everything here. Over the past 6 months, Cameron had been providing me with regular updates about his and Natasha's situation. The aftermath of our confrontation had been swift and dramatic. Within 2 weeks of my revelation, Cameron and Natasha had listed their house, my former house, for sale. The real estate market had been favorable, and they'd received multiple offers. After paying off the remaining mortgage and splitting the proceeds as co-owners, I'd received $235,000 while they'd gotten the same amount. "We found a house," Cameron continued. "It's a modest 3-bedroom ranch in East Hartford. Nothing fancy, but it's within our actual budget, and the mortgage payment is only $1,800 a month." "That sounds much more manageable," I said, genuinely pleased. "How are you feeling about the move?" "Honestly, relieved." "You were right, Mom. We were living beyond our means, and the stress was killing both of us. This new house feels honest, like we're finally living a life we can actually afford." The past 6 months had forced Cameron and Natasha to confront the reality of their financial situation. With the proceeds from the house sale, they'd paid off all their credit card debt, settled the delinquent property taxes and HOA fees, and still had enough left over for a down payment on their new, appropriately sized home. "And how are things?" With Natasha, I asked carefully. Cameron was quiet for a moment. We're in counseling, both marriage counseling and financial counseling. She's had to confront some hard truths about her spending habits and her attitude toward you. What kind of truths? She admitted that she'd been jealous of your financial stability and resentful of feeling dependent on your help. But, instead of being grateful or honest about our struggles, she turned that resentment against you personally. I set down my coffee cup, processing this information. Has she acknowledged what she was planning with the elder law attorney? Yes. And she's deeply ashamed of it. She wants to apologize to you in person, but she understands if you're not ready for that. I looked out at my garden, where late summer roses were still blooming in abundance. 6 months ago, I would have immediately said I was ready to forgive and move forward. But I'd learned important lessons about protecting myself and setting boundaries. I'm not ready yet, I said honestly. Maybe someday, but not yet. I understand completely. She knows she has a lot of work to do to earn back any trust. After we hung up, I spent some time thinking about Natasha's situation. Through Cameron's updates, I'd learned that she was now working full-time at a marketing firm, her first job in over a decade. The financial necessity had forced her to return to work, and apparently, she was discovering that she actually enjoyed having her own income and professional identity again. She was also attending weekly therapy sessions to address what Cameron described as issues with entitlement and control. I found myself hoping she would genuinely change, not for my sake, but for her daughter's sake. At noon, the girls and I were working in my vegetable garden when I heard a car pulling up the driveway. I looked up to see Sandra Chen from Channel 8 News getting out of her sedan, followed by a cameraman. Mrs. Ashford, Sandra called out cheerfully. I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. We were in the neighborhood working on a follow-up story. 6 months ago, Sandra's original news segment about elder financial abuse had aired, using my situation as a case study. The story had generated significant public interest and had apparently prompted several other elderly victims to come forward with their own stories. What kind of follow-up? I asked, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. We're doing a piece on successful outcomes, elderly people who fought back against financial exploitation and rebuilt their lives. Thus, your story has become something of an inspiration. Lily and Rose looked up from the tomato plants they'd been helping me stake, their eyes wide with excitement at seeing a television crew. Are you going to put Grandma Vivian on TV again? Rose asked. Only if she wants to be, Sandra said with a smile. We've been getting calls from viewers who want to know how she's doing now. I considered the request. The original news story had been somewhat embarrassing, airing the details of my family's dysfunction for public consumption. But it had also served an important purpose. Several elderly people had contacted me through the news station to thank me for speaking out about elder abuse. What would you want to discuss? I asked. Your new life. How you've rebuilt after walking away from a toxic situation. What advice you'd give to other elderly people who might be facing similar exploitation. I looked at my granddaughters, who were watching the conversation with interest, then at my beautiful home and flourishing gardens. All right, I said. But I want to include the girls in part of it. I want people to see that standing up for yourself doesn't mean losing the relationships that truly matter. The interview took about an hour. Sandra asked thoughtful questions about the warning signs of elder financial abuse, the importance of maintaining control over your own assets, and the process of rebuilding a life after confronting family exploitation. What would you say to someone who's afraid to stand up to family members who are taking advantage of them? Sandra asked. I looked directly into the camera. I would tell them that love should never come with conditions that diminish your dignity or threaten your security. Real family wants you to be safe, respected, and valued for who you are, not what you can provide. And what about forgiveness? Do you think families can recover from these situations? Forgiveness is possible when there's genuine accountability and change, but forgiveness doesn't mean accepting continued mistreatment. You can love someone and still protect yourself from their harmful behavior. The most touching part of the interview came when Sandra asked Lily and Rose about their new arrangement. Do you miss your old house? Sandra asked. Sometimes, Lily said thoughtfully. But we love Grandma Vivian's house more because she's always happy here, and we can be loud and silly without anyone getting mad. Grandma Vivian teaches us important things, Rose added, like how to be strong and how to stand up for yourself when people aren't nice to you. After the news crew left, the girls and I spent the afternoon as planned working in the garden, preparing homemade pizza, and enjoying the kind of peaceful family time that had become the foundation of my new life. That evening, after Cameron picked up the girls, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea and reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought me to this point, 7 months ago. I had been a woman living in what I thought was my son's house, constantly walking on eggshells, making myself smaller and quieter to avoid conflict, secretly funding a lifestyle for people who saw me as a burden. Now, I was the proud owner of my dream home, financially secure, socially active, and rebuilding relationships with family members on my own terms. The legal proceedings that had followed my revelation had been swift and decisive. Thomas Carter, the elder law attorney who had consulted with Natasha about having me declared incompetent, had been reported to the Connecticut Bar Association for ethics violations. When the full scope of Natasha's planned manipulation came to light, Carter had faced disciplinary action that resulted in a temporary suspension of his license. My own legal team, led by Rebecca Martinez, had ensured that emergency guardianship protections remained in place indefinitely, preventing any future attempts to question my competency without due process and independent medical evaluation. Most importantly, I had undergone comprehensive cognitive and psychological evaluations that confirmed what I already knew. I was mentally sharp, emotionally stable, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching fireflies begin to twinkle in my garden, I thought about all the anonymous notes I'd received during that pivotal week in March. I still didn't know who my concerned neighbor had been, but their warnings had been crucial in helping me understand the full scope of what I was facing. I suspected it might have been Jonna Kingsley, the woman who lived 3 houses down from Cameron and Natasha. She'd been at the book club the night I was humiliated, and her expression had shown genuine discomfort with Natasha's cruelty. Perhaps she'd felt guilty about witnessing my mistreatment and had decided to help in the only way she could. Whoever it was, I was grateful for their courage in speaking up. At 8 p.m., my phone rang one more time. It was Harrison Wells, my financial advisor, with our monthly check-in. Vivian, I have some excellent news about your investment portfolio. I'm listening. Your decision to liquidate some holdings to purchase the house outright was brilliant timing. The market has been volatile lately, but your conservative strategy has kept you well positioned. Your net worth has actually increased by about $180,000 since March. I smiled. 6 months ago, Natasha had been scheming to gain control of my assets, believing I was a confused old woman who couldn't manage her own finances. Instead, my careful planning and decisive action had not only protected my wealth but increased it. Harrison, I want to set up college funds for my granddaughters, $50,000 each, invested conservatively for long-term growth. Excellent idea. That should provide substantial support for their education expenses in 6 or 7 years. And I want to establish a charitable fund focused on preventing elder financial abuse. Let's start with $100,000. That's a wonderful legacy project. Vivian, I'll have both accounts set up by the end of the week. After hanging up with Harrison, I made one final call of the evening to Marcus Sterling, the private investigator who had been instrumental in uncovering the truth about my situation. Mrs. Ashford, how are you settling into your new life? Wonderfully, Marcus. I'm calling because I have a proposition for you. I'm intrigued. I want to fund a pro bono program through your agency, free investigative services for elderly people who suspect they're being financially exploited by family members but can't afford to hire help. That's an incredible idea. Elder financial abuse is rampant, but most victims don't have the resources to fight back the way you did. Exactly. I want to help level the playing field. How much would it cost to fund, say, 20 cases per year? I'd estimate around $75,000 annually would Cover comprehensive investigations for that many cases. Done. Let's call it the Robert Ashford Foundation for Elder Justice, in memory of my late husband. As I hung up the phone, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The money I'd spent 15 years accumulating wasn't just protecting my own future, it was now being used to help other elderly people protect themselves from the kind of exploitation I'd experienced. Over the next few hours, I found myself thinking about the broader lessons of my experience. For too many years, I'd equated love with sacrifice, believing that the more I gave up for others, the more valuable I became to them. But I'd learned that endless giving without boundaries doesn't create love, it creates dependency and, ultimately, resentment. True love requires mutual respect, honest communication, and appreciation for each person's inherent worth. When those elements are missing, all the financial support in the world can't create healthy relationships. I'd also learned the importance of maintaining your own power and agency, regardless of age. Society often expects elderly people to become more passive, more accommodating, more willing to hand over control to younger family members. But age doesn't automatically equal incompetence. And maintaining independence isn't selfish, it's essential for dignity and well-being. At 10 p.m., I made my way upstairs to my bedroom, stopping to check on the girls' rooms, even though they weren't staying tonight. I always made sure their spaces were ready for their next visit. Fresh flowers on their nightstands, favorite books on their shelves, art supplies organized and accessible. These rooms represented everything I'd fought for: the right to create a home where love was freely given and gratefully received, where people could be themselves without judgment, where generosity was appreciated rather than taken for granted. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how much my perspective on family had evolved. I'd once believed that blood relationships automatically deserved unconditional support, regardless of how that support was received or reciprocated. Now I understood that family is defined not by genetics or legal obligations, but by mutual love, respect, and care. Cameron was working to rebuild our relationship on healthier foundations. Lily and Rose brought me joy every time they visited. Even Natasha might someday become someone I could have a civil relationship with, if she continued her therapy and personal growth. But the most important relationship I'd rebuilt was the one with myself. For too many years, I defined my worth by how much I could give others, how useful I could be, how accommodating I could become. Now I understood that my value wasn't dependent on what I provided for others, it was inherent in who I was as a person. The next morning, I woke up naturally at 6 a.m., as had become my habit. I made coffee, sat on my front porch in my rocking chair, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The September air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and my garden was transitioning from summer abundance to fall preparation. This had become my favorite time of day, the quiet hour before the world woke up, when I could simply exist in my own space, breathing as loudly as I wanted, planning my day according to my own desires and priorities. At 7 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Ashford, I saw your follow-up news story last night. I'm 73 years old and I think my daughter and son-in-law are taking advantage of me financially. Could you help me figure out what to do? I don't know who else to ask." I smiled and immediately began typing my response. "Of course I can help. The first thing you need to know is that you have more power than you realize. Let's talk." As I prepared to spend my morning helping another elderly person recognize their own strength and options, I realized that my experience had come full circle. What had begun as personal devastation and betrayal had evolved into a platform for helping others facing similar challenges. The woman who had been told she was breathing too loudly had not only found her voice, she was now using it to amplify the voices of others who needed to be heard. That afternoon, Sandra Chen's follow-up story aired on Channel 8 News. The segment showed me in my beautiful garden, surrounded by my granddaughters, talking about the importance of self-advocacy and the possibility of rebuilding after family betrayal. But the most powerful moment came at the end, when the camera showed me sitting on my front porch, rocking gently in my chair, smiling peacefully as I looked out over the life I'd built for myself. The caption read, Vivian Ashford, 70, proving that it's never too late to choose your own happiness. And that, I thought as I watched my own story conclude, was exactly the message I'd hoped to share in the months and years that followed. I continued to live fully and joyfully in my Victorian home. I helped dozens of elderly people through the Robert Ashford Foundation for Elder Justice. I watched Lily and Rose grow into confident, independent young women who understood the importance of standing up for themselves and others. Cameron and I rebuilt our relationship slowly but surely, based on honesty, mutual respect, and healthy boundaries. Even Natasha eventually found the courage to apologize sincerely for her actions, and while we never became close, we learned to coexist peacefully for the sake of the family we both loved. But perhaps the most important lesson I learned was this: your worth is not determined by how much others need you, but by how much you value yourself. And when you finally understand that truth, really understand it deep in your bones, you become unshakable. The woman who had once made herself invisible to avoid conflict had become visible, vibrant, and victorious. And she lived happily, loudly, and completely on her own terms for the rest of her days. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.